The Star Sport podcast is brought to you by Access Credit Union. Access Credit Union, funding dreams for over 50 years.
Close your eyes and pull like a dog.
And a new Irish record for Phil Healy, 22.99.
Christy Cooney hands over the Sam Maguire Cup to Graham Canty, Cork All-Ireland champions for the 7th time ever.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Star Sport podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Hurley. The Star Sport podcast is brought to you in association with our friends at Access Credit Union. Access Credit Union, where your bank really does matter. Choose Credit Union, choose local, choose community. Now on today's show we will be joined by John Hayes to look back at the recent club action. A lot taking place in the last week or so, including the battle between Castlehaven and St Finbarr, which Castlehaven lost 6-11 to 19 points, and we'll discuss that in detail. Newcestown reached their first Premier Senior Football Championship semi-final in 6 years after beating Carrigaline. Ilen Rovers progressed to the intermediate A-grade semi-finals. They'll be meeting Adrigole in a West Cork derby, and that is just some of the stories that me and John will cover in this roundup of the football action. Obviously delighted to be joined by John this week, so let's get straight into it and hopefully you will enjoy the chat. So yeah, I suppose, John, an entertaining weekend of Cork football action just past the quarterfinals obviously being completed. Obviously one game went to a replay, that was the relegation playoff between your own Carbery Rangers and Valley Rovers obviously. So yeah, an interesting weekend, and we now know our semi-final pairings, I guess.
Yeah, we do. And yeah, look, obviously the big one was in Clon, and unfortunately I was in Waterford for the day, but I did kind of manage to pick up the second half on the radio when I was coming kind of back towards the Cork border anyway. So I didn't know the score tuning in at half time, and then you tune in and it's 4 to 10 points, and obviously that's kind of that gives you a bit of a surprise straight away. And look, you kind of can infer a few things from a scoreline. It's 10 scores to 8. So, and the balance, you just suggest the balance of play is reasonably even, but obviously when a team knocks in 4 goals, it's a serious kind of effort on the other side to try and beat it with just points. And in fairness, I was kind of listening to Jim Nolan on the C103 commentary, and he was saying from very early that he thought Castlehaven would need goals to claw the Bars back. Now, to be fair to them, they made a good goal without it, and at a couple of times in the second half it really looked like the momentum was with them, especially when they brought it to, I suppose, 3 points with loads of time left on the clock, and they have so many players capable of kicking 2-pointers, and Brian Hurley was doing some damage up top. So like with 10 minutes to go with that kind of momentum, they had every chance, but look, a ball coughed up, and I saw the clip of the goal since. The ball coughed up a lateral pass across the 45, intercepted by the Bars, and less than 10 seconds later, I think it was William Buckley finished the last goal into an empty net below, and I think that was one haymaker too many for Castlehaven to come back from, and that kind of took the wind out of their sails, and the Bars finished strongly. So credit to the Bars, I think, to be fair. Castlehaven have had the edge in the last 2 games that they played. Obviously everyone knows all about the rivalry over the last 6 years in a row for the two teams, I think, to meet. And I think it's like the last 2 years Castlehaven probably edged the tactical battle, in the sense that they kind of adjusted after the defeat in 2022, I suppose. 2022 would have been. After losing that one, I think they kind of readjusted and kind of tactically decided that they were going to kind of pull some bodies deeper. kind of defend in more numbers, pull Mark Collins back into a more defensive role, and just leave the two hurleys and Jack Cahalane primarily up top to do the damage. And it worked for them the last 2 seasons, you know. But I think from the sounds of it and what I've seen and people I've spoken to, the Bars kind of probably did something similar to the Haven this year. And obviously through the prism of the new rules, it's a tactic a lot of teams are employing. But the Bars have big, strong physical players all over. They've good, strong defenders. Obviously, some of the Haven guys were able to give them trouble one-on-one the last couple of years, but as a block, as a physical block with, you know, the like of Jamie Burns, Alan O'Connor, Billy Hennessy, the big, strong guys, and with Addy and Ian Maguire and Brian Hayes and a couple more, then they just became hard to break down and were able to force turnovers, move the ball quickly. And I think if Castlehaven look at it now, they probably will look at it and say they probably front-loaded their team a little bit too much. A lot of their big players and their marquee guys were either at midfield or up front, and maybe they just got caught on the break that bit too easily. Then they didn't have, you know, whether it was pushing Damien Cahalane or Rory Maguire deeper into defence, they probably wouldn't be open quite as easily. But yeah, look, credit to the Bars. 6 goals is serious clipping, like, so they'll be delighted with themselves. And it's the end of a couple of long years for Castlehaven as well. They've been on the road, going to the All-Ireland semi-final 2 years ago, Munster final last year as well. So I think the Bars just probably had that edge on them, a bit of extra hunger from losing two years in a row, and the desire not to be out-taught and out-fought again. So yeah, congratulations to the Bars. But, you know, obviously Castlehaven have been serious champions the last couple of years as well.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose you mentioned like Castlehaven had more scores than the Bars throughout the whole game, more scores in the first half as well. But obviously, as you mentioned, goals win games. But the Haven had 68% shot accuracy. They were very, very good at that, in fairness. But the Bars just took their goal chances in a way. Like, in a way, for the Haven, do you think it was kind of their championship kind of skewed on the Newcestown results in the last group game? Because if they would have won that game, they would have played Carrigaline, and how different their championship would have been if that would have happened. So do you think their championship kind of changed on that game in Rossmore previously?
Well, yeah, look, ultimately it did. I mean, there wasn't too many people expecting that to happen. The Bars, Castlehaven and Nemo have been kind of so far ahead in the last couple of years, with only the odd exceptional result like Mallow beating the Bars last year, for instance. They've been so far ahead that they've comfortably come through the group stages the last few years. And maybe that element, maybe they took their eye off the ball slightly in that respect, and they would not have been banking on having to beat the Bars in a quarter-final. No, look, a quarter-final in Clon down in West Cork territory is not the end of the world for a Castlehaven team that's firing all cylinders, but it's just possible, look, that they weren't firing on all cylinders at the moment, and that the Bars game came that a little bit too early for them. And on the basis of, in fairness, a very impressive result for Newcestown in the last round of the group stages. So, yeah, look, I don't think they'd have been expecting to be out this early. It's almost a given that they'd be in the semi-final in the last few years. So, yeah, look, and credit to Newcestown for what they've done, and obviously for backing it up the last day with a kind of fairly dramatic win over Carrigaline as well. So, it's good for the championship, and, you know, good for Cork football to see other teams start to come closer to the standard expected as well, you know. So, look at Castlehaven, they'll be massively disappointed, but it does breathe a little bit of new life and new interest to have a couple of new teams in the semi-final again as well.
You touched there on Newcestown beating Carrigaline. Like, it was a fantastic win for them on penalties. Obviously, Luke Meade getting the winning penalty after a draw after extra time, 18 points apiece. That result for Newcestown on the last day against Castlehaven was obviously their third group win out of 3. Like, it's just been a fantastic season already, hasn't it, for Jim O'Sullivan's men? I know they've done well in the hurling, obviously. They got, like, I think someone mentioned previously, they played, I think, Castlehaven, Mallow, Valleys in the group stage football. Then you had Middleton, Charleville, all them teams in the hurling, Newtown Chandram, and they only lost one game across all 6. And obviously winning on penalties to Carrigaline. Like, they are in so many ways, they are the model dual club around West Cork, and they deservedly are in the semi-final.
Yeah, look, yeah, you have to give them serious credit. You have to give them serious credit to kind of keep things going on both fronts. In the hurling and in the football. So just on the football side of things, that win over Castlehaven just set them up perfectly. Obviously Carrigaline then were down. Brian Adrigole for the most game. I think he came on late in the game, but obviously was carrying a hand injury. But yeah, they're a club that just kind of they have a massive spirit about them, and I think when one is going well, there's always a theory out there that the football will take from the hurling, or the hurling takes from the football, or vice versa. But you see it with Newcestown, when they start rolling in one code, they nearly start rolling in the other one as well. That it just breeds that spirit, and they feed off playing those games regularly and everything else like that. So I think you have to take your hats off to them. There's so much to admire about what they're doing and what they do as a dual club, and the dual clubs that are very competitive. It's a great achievement by them. So and it's like backing up the Castlehaven win with another win as well. Sometimes you see a team get a big result and they don't follow it up in the next round. Whereas Newcestown have shown it was no fluke, and they're in the semi-final on merit. And yeah, they won't give anything easy over to Nemo Rangers. So look, I know Nemo will be strong favourites, and up in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, you would say it might suit Nemo and their brand of football and everything else like that. But Newcestown just won't go down easily, and I expect them to give a great account of themselves when they go there as well, and they won't be going to make up the numbers either. So it'll make for a very interesting game.
You talked about they won't be up there making up the numbers. They'll be there to give Nemo a challenge. I know David Buckley scored 37 points in 4 games, which is very impressive. Ty too, he's been absolutely incredible as well. And so is Luke Mead, obviously as good a hurler as he is the footballer. I know Nemo have a lot of traits in the team, and I know they'll be one of the favourites, as you previously talked about, one of the big 3. But do you give Newcestown any hope of getting over the line against Nemo in 2 weeks' time?
I do think they have a chance. Look, Nemo are favourites and deservedly favourites. I think the vast majority of people are going to expect that it's going to be a Nemo Rangers St Finbarr's final. But like Newcestown and Ballincollig, I wouldn't say they're going in with nothing to lose, but the weight of expectation certainly isn't on their shoulders. But within the camps, they'll be looking at it as a massive opportunity. It's a huge opportunity. You mentioned the players in Newcestown have a nice mix there between experience of Ty Toomey and Cara Keane, Luke Mead, those guys, and they have a lot of younger fellas driving them on as well. So they're a very good side. It all depends on getting a good start. I suppose when you're the kind of underdog in a big semi-final like this, I think it was Mallow went up and faced Nemo last year. Come through in a similar way, having beaten the Bars in the group stages, and they gave a decent account of themselves in the first half, but they didn't really put the scores on the board when they had chances early on, and Nemo's experience came to the fore, and they pulled away in the second half. So look, like I said, vast majority of people will be expecting Nemo and the Bars to do the business and set up another final between 2 of the big 3. But there is a chance, so I suppose in both games, if they were played 10 times, you'd expect Nemo and the Bars to win 9 out of 10. But both Newcestown and Ballincollig are looking at that there's an opportunity there for that 1 out of 10. And maybe that's been a little bit negative and disrespectful as well. It's having beaten Castlehaven, they'll fancy that they can do it, and they won't be awed by Nemo. That's one thing about Newcestown. They don't really fear anyone. They're no great respecter of reputations. In fact, a lot of the time I think with Newcestown, it's the bigger your reputation, the happier they are to have a go, and everything else like that. So I think they will give a very good account of themselves. But Nemo up in Parky Keep in a county semi-final is a big challenge. It's a big challenge for anyone. Their record there is phenomenal, and I think they've been kind of out of the three. They've probably been kind of the one of the big three that's probably been underrated a little bit over the last few years. They're thereabouts every year, but all you repeatedly hear about this Nemo team is that it's not a vintage Nemo team, you know. And I think that's just they suffer in comparison to the team of, you know, Colin Corkery and Joe Kavanagh, and the Cronins, and that team, you know, which was absolutely laden with intercounty players from Cork and from inside Cork and from outside Cork as well. So I think sometimes they suffer a little bit in comparison with them, but they're always in the mix. And Nemo in a semi-final is a big challenge for anyone, really.
You mentioned that obviously Nemo and the Bars would be favourites to make the final. Just out of matter of interest, John, who do you think would win the county championship at this present moment in time?
I think, look, I have a slight inkling for Nemo at the moment. You know, look, I just think, when it comes down to it, their record against the Bars is scary. I think the Bars have a very poor record against Nemo, and I can't remember the last time they've actually beaten them in a championship match, and it's something that I know gives Nemo great confidence when they face each other. I think there was a final or a semi-final a few years ago between Nemo and the Bars where everyone was tipping up the Bars as the strong favourites, and Nemo came in under the radar, not being the ones who were expected to do the business, and they controlled most of the game. And when I think it was the final, maybe about 4 years ago. So if I was betting at the moment, I'd say Nemo. But look, I think obviously the Bars, based on the last, they have kind of evolved their tactical setup a little bit, and changed things from going just gung-ho, man-on-man, 1-on-1 15 across the pitch, to kind of a new system where they're pulling their numbers back and trying to hit on the break where possible. Because look, it's a new thing for them, because the only game I saw for the Bars this year was against Ross and Bandon in the second round, and I wasn't impressed by them at all. I thought they were very poor on the day, and like Ross, a team that's not going very well, should have won the game on the day, but didn't. And obviously, I think since that game, maybe again it was just this kind of thing, just do enough to get through those games. Had to turn it on against Carrigaline, and they did. Had to turn it on against Castlehaven, and they did. So now they've got Ballincollig, and look, a few good friends in Ballincollig as well, and they always do like to be written off, and they'll think again they are being written off to an extent, and they won't. Again, they're another team that when it gets to these stages, they've no fear of reputation, or they've no respect for the Bars' reputation. They gave them a good run. They probably should have beaten them in the quarter-final, I think, last year in Parky Ring, a very good game. Obviously, Liam O'Connell being back is a big boost to them. So they'll need to reproduce that performance, the level of that performance. But I'm just not sure they have enough firepower up front to score enough to beat the Bars. So yeah, I look, it's the obvious answer is a Nemo versus the Bars final, and Nemo's record over the Bars just edged it for me at the moment.
You talked about you're just moving down grades. I said, well, we're staying in the same grade, but you talked about your own Ross there. They drew against Valley Rovers 1-9 apiece, going to a replay on Saturday week in Iskeen at 4 p.m. So that is a big game, obviously, for Ross to stay up. You were hit for most of the game, and then Valley's picked you back thanks to Jacob O'Driscoll goal towards the end of it. But do you think Ross can win the replay?
Yeah, look, obviously I think Ross can win the replay, but I think Valley Rovers will equally think they can very much win the replay. I think they'll think they didn't perform at all really in the first half of the last game. Ross were well in control. Possibly could have been another little bit ahead. Our Valleys came out and started the second half probably better. Ross got a penalty, got a goal to move 7 points up, and you think, given the low scoring nature of the game, you think that's a really good position to be in. But Valleys just put the shoulder to the wheel. They started working the ball. around, popping 2-pointers. Kieran McCarthy, I think, was kicked 1 or 2, and they kicked a couple of long range points, and then that attempt at I would imagine a ball across the square at the end of bouncing the ground, and Jacob Driscoll, just a great leap, got the touch to it. So I think Valleys will think that game will bring them on quite a bit. They've had a couple of injuries. They might get a couple of those players back. Ross are sweating in a couple of injuries as well. And I suppose Valleys will take Ross were a better team for the first half, so they from that game as well, as when Jacob Driscoll's goal went in. I think most people at the ground were thinking, all right, okay, Valleys have all the momentum here, and look, the more likely winners. But to be fair, Ross managed to claim the kick out, worked it up the field, and had 2 very good chances to actually win the game, which they didn't convert. So, yeah, look, I think Ross will be more disappointed not to win the first game, and Valleys will be Valleys will be the happier to have a second chance at the second bite of the cherry. So there's very little between it, really. There's very little between the teams. So yeah, look, it's just one of those games nobody wants to be involved in. You definitely don't want to have a replay and go into it. And I suppose Ross are there for the second time in a row last year with 2 deferrals of the relegation final as well. So it's tough going for those players, but they just gotta knuckle down, get the head down, and get the heads right for Saturday week and try and get the job done. So yeah, there's not much between the 2 teams, and it'll be who performs better on the day.
Speaking of relegation playoffs, obviously the senior A grade, O'Donovan Rossa were involved in that, and they won that against Fermoy. Like, in the lead up to that game, a lot of talk was about O'Donovan Rossa staying in the senior grade for 40 years since 1986. And the potential for them to drop down would be a disaster maybe for the club. But for them to stay up, to win by 4 points, and they beat Fermoy for the 3rd season running as well. Like, they drew against Baylock and Gary earlier in the campaign, so they'd feel that there is something in that O'Donovan Rossa team. They had a bad performance against Donny's, to be totally honest, but they saved their season by getting the win over Fermoy, and they stay in the senior grade.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing, I suppose. Look, it's with the new gradings, and since they came in a few years ago, like I think they've been very successful as a championship in Cork. All the championships are very competitive. Teams are generally playing teams that are in and around their own standards, and you could see it. You know, for Skib going into the last game, okay, they ended up losing, which put them in the relegation final, but a win would have put them through to the quarterfinals, to the knockouts, you know. So they were close on. They weren't that far away, and they were competitive in all their games as well. So it is. I think it's crucial. I think people talk about the relegations in there and being a disaster for clubs and everything else like that. Nobody wants to get relegated, but every team is finding their correct level now. You know, you get relegated on merit and on merit alone, really. So you will end up still being at the right level for your performance levels, you know, so for your abilities. So I think for a big town like Skib, for a big club like Skib, for the only All-Ireland champions that we have down in West Cork, so that it is important for clubs like that to maintain the senior status, even if it is senior A, and it does help with retaining players and the rest of it. So I think they'll be very pleased, and I heard them talking afterwards that they've good minors coming through and everything else like that. So, but it would be good because having the big teams, whether it's Skib or Clan or even Bantry, Bantry have gone from knocking on the door in the last county finals, and again it was the same thing. They were at different stages in their game against the Nemo second string. They were in the relegation final, and then they were going through and everything else like that. So the margins are very, very fine at all the levels now. So most teams can get sucked into a relegation battle, or you could end up in a knockout and go into a semi-final. So the margins are very fine. So it's a positive result for Skib, and it is important for football in the area. But it's also important that they build on it, that they're not just that they're just not surviving at senior A and not going towards the latter stage. I think they're in a semi-final. Was it was it 22 or 23 again. They were there a couple of years ago. I remember seeing them down in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. So that's where they want to be at. That's where everyone wants to be at, and that's the target for most teams at the start of the year. So yeah, the relegation games gave serious drama. I think Bandon and Macroom was an epic game by all accounts, and Bandon will be very disappointed to have coughed up a lead there a couple of times in that game. But for was it 220 to 219 in a relegation match? Sometimes the fear drives teams to produce great performances at the same time, and all those games as well are so tight as well that I think it should be beneficial for Cork in the long run, and it provides great drama and entertainment to have those kind of games for neutrals. It's not so enjoyable for those of us who are involved in watching from the line.
Exactly. So finally, I suppose, looking at the intermediate A grade there, Bandon will be in that next season. But you look at the sides in it. Ilen Rovers got a brilliant win over Mitchelstown over the weekend. Carbery Rangers lost narrowly to Ballinaura in Rossmore by 2 points after a decent enough season by their standards as well. So disappointment for Gabriel's, but joy for Ilen, and that means a semi-final between Ilen and Adrigole, a West Cork derby there. So for Ilen, John, I suppose they were the Premier Senior. I remember them in the Premier Senior game against St Finbarr 4 years ago and really, really challenged them that time. For them to drop down to intermediate A, they kind of, many people would argue that they have found their level, and now they're playing with a confidence, they're playing with a swagger, which is great to see, obviously. And they're in the semi-final, having gone to the championship unbeaten so far, which is great for them.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's, again, back in the old days, you could kind of just survive your way up at senior. You kept losing your games and it didn't matter. You didn't get relegated unless you applied to go down the ranks. Whereas now, as I said, it's completely done on merit. And Ilen Rovers have had a few tough years, and I said, you're going back, it's not that long ago, they beat us in a Premier Senior match over in Castlehaven as well, so they've kind of slipped down the ranks and struggled over the last couple of years, and you kind of hear that they're in difficulty for numbers and struggling with immigration and things like that, and players dropping out and that kind of thing, because they've always had talent. There's always been talent there, so it's good to see that they're kind of turning the momentum around, at the intermediate A grade, and beating Mitchelstown again. Mitchelstown were in the final, I think, 2 years ago. Mitchelstown have Carl O'Mahony, Sean Walsh, I think Mark Keane was playing. So there's, at that level, that's three big players, three serious players. So for Ilen Rovers to kind of turn them over is a great result, and it's disappointing that Gabriel's didn't join them. I think everyone in the area was kind of crossing their fingers that they might cross paths at some stage in the championship, and ideally in a county final, it would have made for a great occasion. But yeah, I think Gabriel's had a good start in their game and everything else like that, and they had been going well. I think they would have fancied it to kick on, but they got reeled in. But look, from talking to a few people, I think Adrigole will be a handful, I think, for Ilen in the semi-final. A lot of people who have seen them this year have been quite impressed with them. So, and they were very close last year as well, if I remember rightly, beaten by a point or something in a semi maybe. So yeah, look, like I said, all the grades are providing brilliant interest. And when you do go down the grades, you get brilliant games. You can't, I made an effort of predicting some of the games there last week in the column, and my hit rate was 50% or so at best, so it does kind of show unpredictability is a great sign in a championship. Nobody wants to know the results in advance when they're going up for most of the games. So different teams are getting their day in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, and Páirc Uí Chaoimh in October. Is the place that every kind of footballer, every club footballer in Cork wants to be at, So it's very enjoyable when you come this time of year and you're training for big matches, county semi-finals and county finals and everything else like that. That's what everyone wants to be involved in. So yeah, good luck to Ilen Rovers, and it's kind of, like I said, it's good to see them turn the momentum around, and that's at least this with this. I think back in the day, I used to think if you got relegated, it was the end of the world. But no matter what, now it's like you can build yourself back up. You're playing at the right standard for yourself, and if you get your house in order and get yourself together, you can climb the ladder again. And it's there for teams to do it.
Exactly so, and long may the competitiveness in the championship continue. It is definitely a very impressive Cork football championship so far, up and down the grades. Thanks for joining us this week, John, and I suppose enjoy the rest of the championship.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Thank you.
The Star Sport podcast is brought to you by Access Credit Union. Access Credit Union, funding dreams for over 50 years.
This week's Southern Star Sports section is already in shops in West Cork and beyond, in the e-paper as well, for those further afar. So pick it up if you haven't already. Quick snippet to the sports section this week. It includes match reports from the games that myself and John just discussed on the podcast there, including Newcestown's win over Carrigaline on penalties and Castlehaven's loss against St Finbarr's. John will also give more of his thoughts in his weekly column this week. We also look back at the Carbery Junior A Football Championship quarterfinals, where Kilmacabea, Tyke St Mary's and Kilbrittain all progressed to the semi-finals. This weekend it is hurling weekend, and we have interviews with Bandon and Kilbrittain before their hurling semi-finals against Sarsfield's second team and Ballyarvin respectively. We also have a preview to the Carbery Junior A Hurling Championship semi-finals, where Bandon faced Durbin Mahoonies and Kilbree faced Newcestown's second team. We take a deep dive into those two games. Also in LGFA, O'Donovan Rossa are preparing for their Senior B LGFA final against Glanmire this weekend, and Ger McCarthy caught up with Laura O'Mahony. Ger also gives his LGFA roundup as usual this week. In soccer, Bay Rovers got an 8-6 victory, incredibly, against Skibbereen Celtic, and that is our featured game in the West Cork League this week, and that also leads our soccer coverage, which is extensive as usual. There's also motorsport and road bowling for our readers to enjoy, so pick up this week's Southern Star if you haven't already. And as usual, if you are further afield or can't make it to the shops, you could subscribe to the Southern Star e-paper and get the Southern Star on your laptop, tablet or phone. Just go to www.southernstar.ie/subscribe, enter your details, and you'll get an exact replica of the newspaper for less than €2 per week. As always, thanks for listening to the Star Sport podcast, and thanks again to our sponsors at Access Credit Union. If you've enjoyed this, please remember to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back again next week. Until then, take care.